Good afternoon, and welcome to this edition of the People Progressing Podcast. And today, really excited to have Amanda Harness on, who's a leadership expert. She has a thing called Leadership First Approach. Just an amazing story of how she got to this point where she's helping people with their leadership journey and helping people who work for leaders. That's how I look at it. When a leader becomes better, their people below them, who the people they're leading, become better. And that's what Amanda does on a daily basis. And it's really fun to talk. And we're going to dive deep into some leadership stuff today and some mindset stuff today. And I'm just really excited to have you on, Amanda. And I always ask people first and foremost, where did you grow up? What'd you like to do as a kid? Any kind of activities like sports or band or drama? Where did you like high school and college and those kind of things? So we get a little understanding of where you came from.
Sure, yeah. Well, thanks for having me on, Joe. I know that we both share a pretty similar perspective on leadership and how much that creates such a better working environment. Um, I am originally from the coast of California, so I'm an ocean girl. I don't necessarily need to just sit on the beach and do nothing. I like to experience the ocean. I love the ocean. But I currently live in Denver, Colorado, so I'm now landlocked. So I'm a mountain person. But when I was younger, I lived in the Bay Area, Santa Cruz. I'm from San Luis Obispo. So I've always lived really close to the water. And we spent a lot of time on our weekends, just driving to the ocean, maybe having lunch, playing in the water. I really enjoyed, from school, I really enjoyed doing track and cross country. I've been a runner since I was 16. I still do that now. Not as much and not as fast, but I still enjoy it. I got really into half marathons and full marathons for a while. I was also actually a gymnast. That was mostly for fun. I was a gymnast for 13 years. So I've always been more of like the
Wow.
athletic person.
Yeah.
My brother was much more the creative. He was the music art person, and I was the athletic person. And we're still really close. I'm actually going to see him in a week. I'm going home to visit my family. Very excited.
You're not too excited.
I'm very excited.
So when you're growing up, what what kind of shaped some of your leadership philosophies? Was there certain people, certain experiences, bad experiences, good experiences, all of the above? What really kind of
hmm
started the journey into leadership for you?
Um, you know, that really started for me when I graduated university, became employed, and had a number of experiences within organizations. If I really look back, I can recognize some situations with teachers that reflect similar experiences that I had in employment. And it's really a matter of which teachers do I remember? Well, it's either the ones that were really awful or the ones that were like really great. And what made them great was them showing up as another human alongside me, right? It was just a matter of we all wake up in the morning as ourselves in bed, and then when we're adults, we just happen to have a title at some company, right? So we're human first and foremost. And the teachers that stood out to me when I was in high school, middle school, were the ones that just showed up in that human way. And then when I got into an employment, I noticed that same thing from a leadership perspective, right? The leaders who just connected with me on a level where they were speaking to another person, not just an employee who needed to get tasks done, immediately made a difference. And I think one of the things I talk a lot about now is remembering that organizations are ran by people, right? So when we're asking for when we're asking for change or transformation or growth, it's not that we're asking an entity to do that, we're asking people to do that. So a lot of my leadership first
Wow.
approach is really around that people-centered approach to things. And I think that through my journey, I've just experienced leaders who, either kind of placated me, didn't really listen to what I had to say, kind of smiled and nodded or shushed me, didn't let me, really be myself, or the ones who actually gave me some autonomy, listened to what I have to say, challenged me, asked me lots of questions. And so it just having experienced really great leaders and really bad ones is what made me want to go out there and help support creating more really great leaders.
Yeah. And I really think in my journey with leadership, a lot of it was being, I learned so much from how I didn't want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was for me, it was probably made me be more intrigued by people who taught me how I wanted to do it. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah.
now you're making me think. I'm supposed to be making you think. You're making me think, and that's awesome. And you said something else there I caught was this. When we're asking an organization to grow and keep progressing, we're not trying to get the entity itself to do that because the entity itself won't do that unless the people running that entity do that.
Correct.
How
Yep.
hard is it for people to understand that?
Um, Honestly, the people I work with are good people who want to be great. And so they do get it. They may not know how to do it, or they may get it on a high level, but they want to understand it deeper and actually know what it means to apply that mindset. Um, if there are people who just don't get that, don't agree with it, or that kind of, I mean, those aren't my people. I don't know what, like I'm not really sure what to do with that. That's not who I'd work with. But as long as someone is willing to consider that perspective or understands it on some level, then we get there. We eventually get there. Whatever conversations we need to have, whatever skills we need to develop. I think the hardest part of that is it feels really big. And so, you said something earlier, or in a previous conversation, where making a small dent is still important. And I think that's sort of the role I play, right? If I can help a leader understand that, yes, it can feel really big to think about the hundreds or thousands of people in an organization and how would we get them all to feel like their leaders are effective and to adopt this change and all that. Well, that's not really what we're after. What we're after is making the dent or the effect that we can in our arena, right? It's the idea that if we each do a little bit, then it's a lot of it together.
That's really profound. Because I do think of it in a broader sense, like fix the whole organization, but let's make a dent and
Mm-hmm.
make a dent and make a dent and make a dent and keep it growing and make
Yeah,
more
a
habits.
ripple
And
effect.
yeah, it's pretty cool. I let people know a little bit, Amanda, you weren't always in owning your own company on leadership. What did you do before that?
Yeah, actually, I have a really interesting career arc. I initially, my original career was in occupational therapy. So I was in healthcare. Um, and I did that for about a decade. But in my career as an OT, I started to move into different boards and committees. I was on different leadership level positions and eventually worked my way into focusing a lot on organizational development. So I was involved in different growth initiatives, different things like leadership development, effective communication, changing services, patient care specific changes to how we provide services or support, even changes into like the technology that was used as a result of any of the other things we were addressing. And so when I was an OT, I was kind of in this dual position of helping the organization as a whole and practicing with patients. But just really decided that that was the direction that I felt the most passionate about. I had learned so much from experience. I utilize actually a lot of my education is very transferable. I use a lot of that in the work I do, especially things like psychology and human behavior, and decided that that was the direction I wanted to go with my career. Also had an entrepreneurial itch, and kind of mashed those two things together to create a business focused on supporting leaders. Yes, I work with companies in healthcare, but also different industries as well.
Well, I always think it's amazing with the entrepreneurs I talk and work with, the the guts. I just have to say it that way. The guts that you have to go from something that was probably pretty stable for you in terms of employment and financial and in those kind of things, and to take that and jump out on your own into this leadership journey and starting your own company and doing those things. What made you do that? What made you pushed you over the edge to take that leap to do it on your own and go for it?
Mm. Short answer is a conversation with a friend on her porch, a bottle of wine, a few tears, and the decision to do it. The longer answer is kind of two parts. One, I was always a great employee and also not a great employee. So I always met or exceeded expectations, but I was also a challenge to leaders. I'm someone who needs constant cerebral stimulation, right? I like new challenges. I like growth. And so I'm one of those employees where the leaders always needed to try and foster my development. And that can be a challenge for some leaders. And so, the idea of starting my own business was interesting because it was such a challenge, and there was always a lot more I could learn and do. And then the other part was I am so good at what I do. And I know that confidently. I say that with humility, but confidence.
Yeah.
And I am so good at what I do. And at the same time, if someone looked at me on a piece of paper, they would assume otherwise. And I knew that if I started my own business, I would give me the chance that other people might not, to do this thing that I love, that I'm amazing at. And so starting my own business basically gave me a platform to go chase that. And it totally worked. So here we are.
Wow. That's one of the coolest things ever on my podcast, what you just said there. One, I think great leaders are humble and confident. So you just said that about yourself, and I 100% agree with what you just said. But the part that you said, I wanted to give myself a chance to do this because I know I'm really good at it, and I wasn't going to wait around for someone else to give me that chance, or
Mm-hmm.
somebody else might not give me that chance. So I'm
Right.
giving myself the chance. I'm
Yeah.
betting on myself. How many people
Yeah.
out in this world need to hear that? That's powerful. That is so cool. Um, let's get back into leadership again. Now you got me all fired up. What are some problems that you're seeing out there right now, Amanda, in some of the leadership things that you're seeing out there that might be some problematic things that are going on out there in some of the businesses or something that you're working with? Not, you don't have to name any names or anything like that, but
Yeah, sure.
what are some
Yeah.
things that you're seeing that are kind of struggles for people?
Yeah. One that is always is communication. It's really complex, got a lot of layers. There's, relational communication, human to human. There's tactical communication, what email needs to go to who and when. And then everything with relational communication, it's just so easy to misinterpret and misunderstand. And for someone to not be clear, it's really our word choice, how we say what we say, when we say it. It's really complex and layered. And so I work, every company I work with, we're always working on either an individual's communication or them understanding how others communicate, how things are received and perceived. And so there's always addressing that. And then one other kind of more specific one that I think isn't necessarily new, but is just continuing to grow and get more breadth is the multi-generational workforce. Um, there are 5 generations in the workforce, and between those 5 generations, so much has changed in our culture, our environment, our world, our nation. And because of that, people have changed. And so there are big gaps between what the baby boomers, how they perceive and relate to work, and how millennials or Gen Z perceives and relates to work. And that's been a pretty consistent challenge. And it really comes down to things like employee engagement, performance, retention, and what do we need to do to better understand those differences in those generations and foster the people in different ways. And honestly, one of the things that I work on a lot is people trying to stop being so frustrated.
Wow.
Working with someone who's a baby boomer or a Gen Xer, and the amount of frustration they have for the way that millennials and Gen Zs relate to work is just so prevalent. And there are a lot of things that I could say. There's a recent LinkedIn newsletter I actually wrote about it. If anyone wants to go check it out, but it's trying to help people just stop getting so frustrated, look at things more objectively, and just decide that there are things we need to do a little differently, and how do we make that work for everybody. It's a pretty big challenge, but one I'm seeing a lot of.
So is there an example you can give between like a generation that is different?
Yeah,
You know, I know we went to that, we heard that, I think you were there at the Vistage Summit where the Whitney talked about the differences
yep,
in some of the things. One of the things that hit me
yeah,
was um, when I try to tell somebody something or help them learn something, they think I'm yelling at them,
mm,
and that's how they perceive it. Like when you're trying to
yeah.
help them or
There's
tell them something.
communication. You brought that up again.
Yeah. Um, and I always say that, is there anything specific that you know, you don't have to name a bunch, but is there just like
Sure.
one thing is an aha
I can give you
moment for
one.
somebody?
Yeah, for sure. So the idea of work ethic uh, feels really different between the generations. But if we really look at it, work ethic just means someone's engagement or commitment to doing a good job. But at some point, work ethic in our culture meant overwork. So someone who, let's say, is a Gen Xer, they are such an independent generation, so latchkey kids, right? And they just in their work ethic, their version of that is I'm going to work however many hours it takes, right? So even if I got in at 8 and I'm leaving at 7, I just needed to get this done. So I'm just going to stay till 7. Or I might open my computer on Sunday to get some things done before Monday because that has to happen, right? They just worked whatever hours need to be worked just to get the job done. And millennials, as an example, their work ethic is really strong between the hours of 9 to 5, right? So they know how to work hard and they will show up, and they have this strong desire to help organizations grow and become better, but they're less willing to work more than 40 hours. They have a strong value on integrating work and life, and they place an equal value on those things. And so the idea of them just, well, I'm just going to stay till 7, or I'm just going to work on Sunday just because, is just not something they think about. It's not something that, unless they're asked to do something like that, they're not just going to do it on their own. And so I've worked with leaders who basically ask me, how do I get my employees to want to work more than 40 hours? And I'm like, well, first of all, that question's not the right question we should be asking. And so, yeah, I think that that one is an example of how people perceive what work ethic means, and the difference in how people spend their time in work and outside of work. I tend to feel almost a little bit of resentment from the generation that
Yeah.
just did whatever needed to be done, toward the generation that's like, I'm going to do what needs to be done, but it also has to fit in this 9 to 5 space.
Yeah, I feel that resentment too. That's a big topic a lot. I deal with that
Mm-hmm.
topic a lot. So I have to ask you, what's the answer to that question when you just said that, when somebody says, how do I get them to work more than 40 hours? What do you say?
Well, the that's it depends is my first answer,
Okay.
and we shouldn't try to get them to work more than 40 hours. How do we change the efficiency? How do we optimize while people at work? While they're at work, the idea is, what if we went backwards and started there first? Why isn't it happening within 40 hours? Let's start there. Rather than just, how do I get them to want to work
Oh,
more than 40
yeah.
hours? How do we make their 40 hours be better first? Let's
Yeah.
start there. That's usually my first answer. Um, and then it can
Wow.
grow from there, and there might be more than one right answer, but that's the first place we start.
I love that. It's man, you made that easy. You made that easy. I really like that. Let's go back to communication. I think that's probably the number one thing for me uh, in leadership is the communication part and being present with people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you have to learn to listen so that you can listen to learn. The number one thing I find with me being a coach and leaders I work with is we're fixers. We want to
Mm-hmm.
solve. So when I'm listening to somebody tell me a problem, instead of listening all the way through to learn the whole problem and learn the little specifics of it, I'm already in fix it mode and I'm
Yeah.
not listening all the way through. What suggestions do you give for listening to get better at listening?
Yeah. So communication goes both ways, right? It's speaking and listening. Um, the what you're describing is what I call you either listen to understand or you wait to respond, right? You're just
Right.
waiting for them to pause long enough to feel like you can jump in, right? Um, that can be hard if the person's going on for a long amount of time, right? There are thoughts you want to try and not forget. And how do I balance trying not to forget what I wanted to say, but also really listening? And there are a few things. There's the old adage of like, well, if you forget what you were going to say, it wasn't important enough in the first place. Or write something down, right? How often these days do we not have somewhere we can take a note, whether it's on a post-it note or in our phone? Like you can let them know ahead of time, like, would you mind pausing that for just a second? I just want to write down a note to myself so that I can remember to respond to something you just said. I'm going to write it down and then I want you to keep going. I just want to be able to make sure we come back to it. Right? There's nothing wrong with that. And so being able to take what your thought and put it somewhere for safekeeping allows you to not lose it, but also not just wait to respond. And that's just something little, right, that you can do. You can also let the person know if they're just going on and on. You can say, would you mind pausing there and holding your thought? Because I'd like to respond to a few things you've already said. You know, I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
there's just ways that you can make it reciprocal. The other thing is a lot of times when we get into fix it mode, we're we're in we're in this advice mode or this suggestion mode
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
really we need to be in curious mode. And
Yeah.
so rather than give them answers or suggestions or advice, there might be more questions you actually should ask, because if you thought you had the right advice and you asked 5 more questions, suddenly the advice you were going to give them isn't actually the right advice anymore. So really listening and seeking to understand is also, are there other questions that you could ask too?
Yeah. And that's for me, what's really helped me with this is doing this podcast
Mm,
because it's a one-to-one thing. There's nothing else bothering me. And when I do a podcast, I do it because people intrigue me and I want to learn from those people.
yeah.
So when I get into that intriguing mindset and that learning mindset, it helps me come up with better, deeper questions. Because when
Mm-hmm.
I'm working with somebody in my leadership development coaching that I do, for me, it's I want them to own the answer. And most of the time, with good feedback or good question back to them, they can usually solve problems better than they thought they could or on their own. And now they're owning that instead of me owning the solution. Now they're owning solution by me having some good questions back to them. But it all starts for me is being intrigued. Like having you on this podcast has got me so excited because I'm so intrigued with some of the things that you're doing and the people you're helping and all those different things is so intriguing to me. How about when I'm a leader and I'm running a company and someone comes to me, I step back and say, what can I learn from this person? What can this person give me instead of me give them? And
Mm-hmm.
it's really helped me with that. I
Yeah.
don't,
And there's always a time and place, right? There are moments where we're busy and we need to move fast and advice is what's needed, right? And that's okay. But there needs to be a balance. We need to make sure we're doing all of the things. That there are also times where we're pausing, asking questions, letting the other person, exercise their strategic and critical thinking. And there's a way to do something in the middle too, right? Where you kind of give advice and ask questions like, what are your thoughts on considering XYZ solution? Right? So you're letting them think through it. You're not telling them what to do, but you're giving them an example of something they
Yeah.
can consider.
Yeah.
The other thing that I hear that as you were speaking, you kind of talked about how this kind of conversation is really great for this kind of curiosity and learning. Um, it doesn't always have to take a long time is one other thing I tell people is they always like, well, I don't have time for that. And it's like, well, it's not true, actually. That's not ultimately true because it can take 30 seconds or it can take 90 minutes to ask questions and gather information. And there are times where you do start to enter a conversation, you don't have time. And instead of interrupting the person and being like, I don't have time, I gotta go, you can say, this is really interesting and I'd actually like to learn a lot more. Would you mind going on the calendar and putting a 30-minute block somewhere that works for both of us? Because
Oh, wow.
I'd like
Yeah.
to come back to this and I just can't right this second. That's perfectly fine. Or, being able to say, like I have about like, hey, it sounds like this is a really important conversation. I have about 10 minutes. Does that feel like you want to get started and finish it later, or do you want to go ahead and put some time on the calendar where we could just have one conversation? Are you giving them options? You're letting them know. Or when you're in a hurry, say like, hey, I don't mean to be short, but I am going to just quickly tell you something and blah 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 blah. Right? Instead of those people who there are some people who really need like pleasantries. They need the hey, how are you? How's your day? Before you get started, and they feel like you're mad at them or you're yelling at them, like you said. If they don't do that, but if you just let them know, hey, I don't mean to be short. I'm just kind of in a hurry. Do you mind if I just give you some really quick information? Like you're just letting them know this is a situation. Here we go. Right? It's just a lot more of like how do we make sure people understand the context of what's in our brain
Yeah. Yeah.
without like trying to make them assume or guess or us guessing what's going on in the context of their brain. It's just a lot like there's just a lot like left out of communication that I think people have this idea that it just takes so much more effort and time when really it doesn't. It actually saves us some in the end if we really think about it. Like
Yeah.
the more clear we are up front, the less reaction
Yeah.
or redoing we have to do later.
And what you're describing, all those different techniques, little techniques like there, really shows the other person that you care about them too. It really
Mm-hmm.
does. You're being honest with them. You're showing that you care. You're showing that this conversation means something to me. That's why I need more time. So if we
Yeah.
can book a 30-minute, whatever, that's showing that person you really do appreciate them and care about them and what they have to say. And I just think being present with people is so important. I want to jump into a little bit about Business Accelerated, your company. You have a thing called leadership first approach,
Mm-hmm.
and you have this other thing called the common side effects of the leadership first approach. So those are good side effects, right? Those are
Yeah.
when we think about side effects, I think we're always thinking something negative. These are good side effects of a leadership first approach. Can you name a couple of those?
Yeah, it's kind of imagine a flywheel where if you first focus on leadership, that's when we really create real progress in organizational development. So it's this idea that effective leadership means engaged, high performing, and retained employees who then provide great service to your customers, who are then loyal and stick around and then also refer others, that then turns into growth internally and externally via revenue. And then that extra revenue turns into you either being able to help more customers, grow the company, or even provide more support for more leaders just so the flywheel keeps going around. And so those are the side effects is effective leadership, great employees, happy customers, more money. And it just goes around and around and around. So
Oh,
that's the
love it.
leadership first approach is that
Love it.
essentially we create organization development, growth, greater revenue with leadership first.
I always ask the leaders I work with this question: Are you a people leader or a data leader?
Mm,
And I always, and I've been pretty honest with them. I said, if you're a data leader, good luck, um, because the people are the ones who are going to give you the data. And if you keep helping them keep growing or learning and growing and progressing, guess what your data is going to keep doing? Data
yeah,
meaning revenue.
yeah,
Um, and that's kind of your approach too. When I read your stuff, I'm like, man, this is just so strong. How important are teams in what you do in terms of you go in and work with a business and it looks like some things are fractured and all those kind of things. How important is the team concept in the leadership approach that you use?
Yeah. I often work with leadership teams and privately one-to-one. And it's because teaming is hard, right? Leaders are people who are comfortable, well, most of the time are comfortable or like to make decisions. They're usually someone who people come to for answers. They've got an agenda, they're focused on goals, right? And if you have a bunch of individuals who do all of those things, then there can be a lot of headbutting or conflicting agendas or misalignment, right? The way I kind of look at it is, even if we all understand the same goal, we might be rowing in the same direction, but we're not in the same boat. So it takes some of us less time or more time to get to that goal, or we take different routes. And so our resources, both physically and emotionally, mentally, are spread in different directions. But if we're all going in the same direction and in the same boat, that's when leadership teams really can become an advantage. And so I'm often working with these teams to help facilitate some of their decision making, their alignment, their cohesion, so that we can leverage them as a collective as an advantage for the company versus just a bunch of sort of siloed positions that
Yeah.
don't create real progress.
I love that. And it's when you're talking about rowing in the same boat, that's such a great picture for people to understand. Leadership in teams and leadership. What happens? I work for a company, I'm part of a team within inside this company, and I go to I don't like calling, I think you manage machines and processes, and I think you coach and lead people. So I go up to the upper coach and I say, this isn't working. The leadership that we're having for this team just isn't working. And they call you and you come in. What's the first thing you would do? So if I addressing a leadership problem, how hard is it for people to do that? I guess is my question. How hard is it for people to say we have a leadership problem here?
Yeah. Oftentimes, it's not necessarily the people I work with aren't always saying, hey, we need help with our leadership team or we're having a leadership problem. Sometimes, yes, that is exactly what they're looking for. They know it. More than anything else, they recognize they're having growth or people problems, right? So their employee teams are struggling. Their numbers are down. They're struggling with anyone having accountability. It's hard to really execute or implement any initiatives, right? We keep having the same conversations 10 times. We are getting to our goal, but a lot slower than we meant to, or we're getting there, but it's a lot harder than we wanted it to be. And they either are problem aware, but solution unsure, or they know something's up, but they don't even know what the problem is, let alone a solution. But they know there's something else. And so those are the kinds of things I typically hear is there's struggles with achieving goals, making progress, execution, or challenges among their people. And I don't go into a company and work directly with employees. I still always work at the leadership level, but it's a teach a man to fish method where
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
I'm going to teach you how to really identify the problems, but then know exactly what the cause is. Because if we don't know what the cause is, then we might try a solution that isn't the right solution or place blame where it doesn't belong or a variety of things. And so whether it's people problems or growth challenges, those are the things they're typically feeling more. And then we have conversations about addressing it through a leadership lens. Yeah.
So you mentioned something earlier, Amanda, that caught my attention was goals. How important is it for leaders to set goals for their people? I hear different things about that. They're good, some are bad, some, all over the board with it. In
Mm-hmm.
your mind, where do goals fit into all this leadership development stuff?
Do you mean on like an employee performance?
Yeah, employee performance, team goals within the company, total overall company goals, those
Mhm.
kind of things are goals. I think goals give you hope and direction, and they give
Yeah,
you a purpose. But some people disagree with that. Some people say, I don't,
yeah,
it puts too much pressure on my people. Where are you,
yeah.
where do you stand on that?
I think there's a balance of making it collaborative. Um, the, the idea of getting your people more engaged in helping you achieve goals is it has to come from a place of purpose. The most engaged employees feel purposeful. And so if you can collaborate on goals, that's what you're going to get the most result from. And there's differences in goals. A lot of times people think of OKRs and KPIs and they're very data driven and numbers oriented. But a lot of times there's some kind of relational goal that has to happen in order for that KPI or OKR to be achieved. So for example, if we've got a department who is client facing, maybe sales oriented, so it's a very revenue generating department, but they don't collaborate at all with the ops department. And both of those departments butt heads all the time and it's not very fluid. But you have numbers goals for both of those departments, right? Because those are two departments that here's how the work is done and here's how we talk to clients and close deals. Both of those are directly or indirectly revenue generating. And if you're going to set KPIs for those, but you don't fix the collaboration problem, good luck with those KPIs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So there has to be, I think, a little bit greater emphasis on some of our relational goals that we're missing. Companies are really great at setting number goals and don't often combine any kind of relational goals that will turn into them achieving those numbers goals.
See, and I agree with you 100%. And I also think for me as an ex-coach, it wasn't so much the goal as it was the process. I'm a
Mm-hmm.
huge process person. If we set a goal, we better also come up with a process on how we're going to achieve that goal.
Yeah.
And if we don't have a process to achieve it, because for me, it's about eliminating regret. So if I set a goal as a business to get $1 million in revenue, but I don't have a process on how we're going to try to get there, and we get to the end of the year, we're at $990,000, or we're 10,000 short.
Yeah.
And we look back at it and say, why did we come up short? And we don't really have an idea why. Now we're going to have regret. But if we set up a process, and I call it winning the process. So if we win the process, whatever that is, so by the 15th of January, we're going to do this. By the 17th of February, we're going to do this. And we won that part of the process. We won that part of the, and we get down to the end of the year and we get that same number. We're still $10,000 short, but we can look back and say, you know what? We did everything we were supposed to do. We just came up short. We can go back and look at our processes. Is there anything we need to change for the next year? And just use that process. The process is the important thing for me. That's how I look at goals. If you don't have a process to achieve the goal, good luck. You're probably not going to achieve the goal, and you're also probably going to achieve regret. But
Yeah.
if you have a process and you won that process and you didn't achieve the goal, you won the process, so you're probably not going to have regret. And that's kind of how
Yeah.
I look at goals. And I try to teach that with the leadership teams and stuff that I work with too, is coming up with those processes is important. But you always mention this, and it's so important, and I want to reemphasize it. You're always talking about communication within the goal.
Yeah.
Communication, communication, communication is so big in what you're teaching people. Expand on that a little bit more. I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, but I want people to really understand how important listening is, speaking clearly, the nonverbal parts of communication, all those things, not keeping things from people. How just vitally important is it?
Yeah. One thing you were kind of speaking to there in regard to the process is it's really having a roadmap and a plan and
Yeah,
being proactive, right?
right.
So if you
Yeah,
get to the end of the year and you're 10 grand short and you're like, well, why did that happen? Well, you can't really do anything about it. Like, sure, let's figure out why it happened, but you still can't do anything about it.
right.
But if you set the plan, you make your process, your roadmap, whatever it is, and along the way, you're checking in and looking at things, then you'll know ahead of time that you're going to be 10 grand short. You'll already know.
Right.
And so
Right.
when it comes to the communication part, it's a proactive thing as well. And it's essentially, I mentioned before, the tactical and relational communication. The crux of any of that is perspective. We all come with our own past life experiences, our biases, our
Wow.
opinions, our judgments, and that changes our perspective. And that perspective then changes how someone receives the information you give them. And
Wow.
it can sometimes be a nuance, even to the idea of like calling something cheap. Well, do they mean inexpensive or poor quality? Right? Like, and that's context based, and that same thing is perspective based. Context and perspective are really closely tied, and it's around how we interpret things. And so when you're thinking of your word choice or your body language, your tone of voice, um, it's really thinking of how can I proactively ensure that what I intend to communicate is going to be perceived as much as possible the way I mean it to. And there's always going to be outliers. You can't do it 100%. Someone will perceive or receive your information a way you didn't intend or misunderstand or something. But if anyone's interested, a really great example is if you go to my LinkedIn. About a month ago, I had a post go viral. And I mean like 300 million or 3 million views, 200 reposts, 800 comments. Like, it went crazy. And it was a great example of miscommunication. In my post, there is a part that I wrote and then an image I gave. And the image is of a leader holding a whiteboard. And it was their creative way of describing how they like to give their employees autonomy. And in my post, I explained how this CEO was trying to be creative and how he demonstrated his or communicated his value on autonomy, but all the ways that it could be misunderstood. And 93% of the comments, I did a rough estimate, completely misinterpreted. They only looked at the image, they did not read what I wrote, and everyone was wild. They were so angry at this CEO's whiteboard. They did not read through his whole message or my whole message. And it was just a great example of how people only hear some of what we say, they only receive some of our actions, and then they interpret that however their perspective allows. I then made a follow-up post as well as a follow-up newsletter kind of touching on all of this, if anyone wants to go check that out. But it was just such a good example on exactly that, how someone perceives something is so individualized, and that though this CEO tried to be creative in his way of describing his value on autonomy, and though I tried to address it in my post as well, the way that you are clear about something proactively has such a massive result retroactively.
Yeah. Wow. That's pretty powerful too. This has been great. This is a master class on leadership for people. I have to ask this question. How important is self-awareness as a leader?
Yeah. Um, Self-awareness plays a major role, and it's part of, I mean, it is a requirement, I think, because there is a difference between empathy and compassion, in my opinion, but both take some self-awareness. But beyond that, it also takes, there's self-reflection, self-awareness, self-management. Down the line along that spectrum is eventually emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And those are all really different, and they all play a different role, and they're all interconnected in our ability to look back on how we maybe reacted to something, or understanding why we reacted that way in the moment, being able to adjust how we're reacting to something. And that it plays a major role in the clarity of your communication, building trust with your teams, remaining consistent, really getting people on board and engaged, helping them understand the role they play, feeling purposeful. you have to be self-aware enough to show up in a way that supports other people without leaving yourself out too. I like to change the term servant leadership to like service leadership. Um, or, I feel like sometimes another part of the leadership first approach is the idea that we're teaching leaders to put themselves last. And I disagree, because self-awareness is so important, and we have to make sure they're focusing on them too. So I think it plays a major role, and it has a lot of positives and challenges that come along with it. But that's why when you're working with a mentor or a coach, or someone like that, that's why that's so helpful for all leaders. I think most any leader should have some kind of mentor or coach, because your self-awareness, you have to be able to have someone who can challenge you a bit, or hold the mirror up, or offer you opportunities to see things from a different way in order for you to actually enhance your self-awareness.
Love that. Trust, real quick. I know we're getting out of time. I have to hit the trust. I'm a leader. I come to Amanda. I'm really having a lot of trust issues. I don't feel like my employees are trusting me, and I really don't trust them. How important is it in leadership? And how do you gain trust? How do you, I guess the word I would use, how do you deserve trust?
Mm. I like to, a lot of times I take big concepts and like to break them down. It's a major part of my approach to things. And so I like to say that there's big T trust and little T trust. And big T trust comes from a ton of little T trust. And so if you want your teams, when the stakes are high and things are moving fast, and you just need them to like do as you say, right? Which is a command and control leadership is not something I recommend all the time. I think there are only certain times, certain opportunities. But if you want the kind of trust where it's like, we're at a deadline, the stakes are high, we just have to get this done, I need you to just go act. That requires a lot of big T trust. And in order to get big T trust, you have to show up on the daily and offer little T trust along the way. You need to receive it too. You have to trust them back. It goes both ways. But for example, if one of your team members comes up to you and has something they need to tell you, and you're like, I don't have time for this, I now have to go. They're not going to trust that you value what they have to offer, what you need to say. But if you do one of those things I said earlier, and you're like, hey, I really do want to know what you have to say. I'm actually running out the door now. Can you please, I want to talk to you, but please pop on my calendar and put 30 minutes on there for us. I want to hear what you have to say. I just have to run out the door. That's a little T trust. Like you said, it shows that you do actually want to hear what they have to say. You're not dismissing them. It's just there's a time issue right now. Like you're not quite available at the moment. And so it's these, or someone being able to come up to you with a problem without you like reprimanding them, right? They have to be able to come to you when things don't go well as when things do go well. Mm-hmm. And that's a little T trust moment that turns into big T trust along the way. Wow. So the little T's are all day long, every day, that eventually turns into big T trust, going back both to and from you to them, and then towards you.
Man, what a great way to explain that. I am using that. I just want you to know I'm using big T and little T. That is so awesome. Okay, I know we got to go at 3, so I got 3 questions for you. I wrote a book called The 3 Ps, Finding Your Purpose, Perspective, and Passion. I ask every guest I have on my podcast those 3 questions. What is your purpose in life?
Purpose in life. Gosh, my personal life or professional life, or in general?
Personal life. You're just in life in general. Okay.
My personal life is to have a lot of experiences. I like to have a lot of experiences, whether they're little or big, whether it's a big travel trip or a new book. I'm here to just experience a lot of things.
And I just have to ask, and I've never asked anybody this question before, is that because you want to use those experiences to help others?
I suppose so. I do find that I like to help other people, like just be happier and enjoy life, because that's one of the things I'm after. Yeah. And I do think that my experiences contribute to that. So in some way, sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. Passion. So I skip over perspective. I'll tell you why, but what's your passion in life? What do you love to do?
My passion is cheese and wine. No, I'm just kidding. My passion is, I guess, still related to experiences, but I like some form of indulgence. And I like others too. Like I like when we can pause and all go camping together and like indulge in each other's presence and share some drinks, share some stories. I think I'm very passionate about like feeling like you're having a purpose in a moment or in a long term. Like I'm just really passionate about making sure that people are growing, and that includes me and other people. But like that growth and that development, I think is really important.
Yeah, and I always say that your purpose and passion kind of mirror each other, help each other, support
Yeah.
each other. And what the glue is that holds them together is your perspective. What's your perspective on life? And things are coming at us all the time to try to get us out of our purpose and passion and change our perspective. But if our perspective is the glue that holds us together, what would you say your perspective on life is that holds those two things together?
I would say my perspective is that my perspective is limited. And I think curiosity is one of the most underrated, undervalued, or underutilized either personal attributes or leadership attributes. I think that things like giving people the benefits of doubt or knowing that something you read is only part of the answer or part of the information. I just think that recognizing that your perspective is a limited perspective and being curious to want to know parts of other perspectives is really important.
Last question, how do people get a hold of you? How do people hire you?
Yeah.
You come speak with their team, work with their team, whatever it might be, book a call. How do they get a hold of you?
Yeah. You can find me on LinkedIn at Amanda Harness. The N is capitalized in the middle, capital H, capital N, Harness. So find me on LinkedIn. And then you can also email me, Amanda at Business Accelerated. Accelerated is spelled funny. It's EXCELERATED, Business Accelerated. And really the first step is let's just have a conversation so that I can better understand you, what your questions or concerns and goals are. I can share more about me and the work I do, and we can decide if it's a good fit or if I can be helpful in any other way.
Amanda, you're full of wisdom. I get amazed by everyone I have on my podcast, and you amaze me again today. It's the wisdom that you have and the gift of teaching and helping others with their leadership journey is amazing. And I just hope you keep getting to spread that wisdom out there. I think we have a leadership void in our country, and I think we need to start building better leaders, people who care about each other, leaders. And you're certainly doing that. We need to get you out there more. Somehow, some way, we're going to get you out there more. So I appreciate you so much for coming on. I know you got to go and do your Halloween and enjoy that with your family and so forth. But just blessed to have you on. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for the kind words. Thank you for engaging in a conversation. I've really enjoyed it. And we've met in person, and I can't wait to see you next time.
Yeah, it's awesome. And people, thank you so much again for listening and supporting our podcast, the People Progressing podcast. What an amazing show today with Amanda Harness on. And just please share it. People need to hear this stuff. People need to hear her wisdom and so forth. So, and like I always tell you, please, please, please keep progressing and have a great day. Thank you so much.